This is Module 8 case study for EDL 853. Get this child out of my room. So Carl is a student who recently witnessed a pretty traumatic divorce between his parents. When the divorce occurred, his levels of behavior shifted and increased from self-abuse to anger and aggression towards others, especially his homeroom teacher, Nancy Taylor. Taylor really struggles with disciplining him and is kind of at her wit's end on what she needs to do to manage his behaviors. She contacted Susan Green, the school's special education teacher, who is a first-year teacher. Although Susan and Nancy disagree on the best course of management for Carl, Susan calls a meeting to amend Carl's IEP in hopes that removing him from the general education classroom during an outburst will help Nancy with her stress and frustration. The interaction between the parents during the meeting was harsh and inappropriate for the school setting. These characteristics, as well as the behavior shown by Nancy, leave Susan feeling frustrated and unaware of how to best help Carl when it seems none of the adults in his life care. Category 1. The information provided to me in Get This Child Out of My Room includes Carl's background, the district and teachers' backgrounds, and Susan's plan for Carl's IEP. As an audience member, I was made aware of Carl's background, specifically his parents' brutal divorce, and how this affected not only him, but his older siblings as well. All three kiddos seem to struggle with emotional skills like coping and escalation. The case study explains the district's defining characteristics, including the lack of a physical principal in each building, as well as the traveling and scheduling of specialists like school psychs, speech paths, and the superintendent himself. With a building staff and district staff that has to travel across large distances, support and access to staff is pretty poor. Nancy, Carl's homeroom teacher, is a veteran teacher of 10 years who is well liked by the staff. Susan, the new SPED teacher, is a first-year teacher hired for the district and works hard to support the teachers in the building while maintaining a strong working relationship with them and meeting the needs of her kiddos. After conferencing with both Nancy and her district SPED coordinator, Susan made an amendment to Carl's IEP that would plan for him to be removed or restrained and removed from the classroom when he escalated to a behavior level not appropriate for the general education room. The information I do not know includes the plan for Carl to de-escalate, how he's going to calm down, how Susan will address Nancy in the future regarding her outbursts and her mindset towards Carl, and the new behavior plan for Carl. In the case study, Susan was not clear as to what Carl will do in order to de-escalate his behavior. Will he go into a sensory room? Will he be put in a safe room? Will he have time to go on a walk and cool down? What is Carl's specific plan in regards to the fluctuation and severity of his behavior? How will Susan address this matter with Nancy? Nancy needs to understand that Carl needs access to the least restrictive environment, and at this time, because he is not educationally or developmentally delayed, her classroom is the best location for him. I do not know what the behavior plan is moving forward for Carl. Utilizing the safe room or his removal from class is not really a behavior plan, rather a consequence for his behavior that's more of a last resort. What will the team decide on during their collaboration that will meet or accommodate Carl's needs while promoting positive behavior and positive choices at school? With all of this knowledge, the current problem is Carl has emotional trauma and a behavior disorder as a result of his upbringing and the recent traumatic divorce. His current teacher, Nancy, does not really know how to successfully accommodate his needs, give him grace and patience, or find ways to help him de-escalate safely in the classroom, as well as Nancy struggles with working with Susan in a professional manner. Category 2. First and foremost, Susan needs to continue advocating for Carl. At this time in his life, he seems to have little to no support from any adults that provides patience, fosters love, and promotes good choices. Carl unknowingly needs Susan's support, and Susan needs to remain confident in herself and steadfast in her decision of supporting him and keeping him in the least restrictive environment. My proposed plan of action has 4 main parts that work in collaboration in order to be successful. First, Susan needs to continue to observe Carl's triggers and needs. The case study stated that Carl said he didn't know why he would get angry, but consistent data and note-taking may shine a different light. Perhaps it is always at the beginning of math class because Carl doesn't like math. Or perhaps it is in the late morning before lunch because Carl is hungry due to his parents' work schedule. He might not have breakfast. Maybe it is at times he is required to work in groups or with partners, and that's a trigger. The more time spent documenting Carl and in the classroom will provide data that will only paint a better picture of Carl's behavior and mood. More time in the classroom and more data also allows Susan to better understand Nancy and the techniques she currently uses to support Carl. Susan can use this opportunity as a time to have a candid conversation with Nancy about new approaches that might benefit Carl in the classroom. However, when this conversation does occur, Susan needs to acknowledge Nancy's expertise in years taught while still making suggestions in a way that merits buy-in from Nancy. Nancy probably will not work to change her behavior if she does not feel a mutual relationship with Susan or Carl is beneficial. Susan will really have to put effort into getting Nancy on board and into educating her on Carl's needs. Next, Susan, Nancy, and any specialists, the assistant superintendent, and Carl's parents need to formulate a plan in collaboration that will work on ensuring his success. They need to decide on a behavior system that will address his behavior, accommodate his de-escalation, and reward his choices not only at school, but also at home. When behavior expectations are the same at school and at home, students are more accustomed to making better choices and are likely more successful. Carl needs to be held accountable for his choices in all areas of his day, and this starts with collaboration of staff and parents. Category 3. The quote from the case study I thought aligned best with Category 3 was when when Susan was kind of thinking to herself at the end of the case study. She said, "It seemed that all the adults in his life were so absorbed in their own problems. No one had time for Carl. What could she do?" To me, this shows what an advocate Susan is after being repeatedly beat down, both by Nancy but also in the meeting. Witnessing a couple's argument, she still thought about Carl and his needs and how to address him best. Because Susan is consistently advocating for Carl and his need for a least restrictive environment, she's not only doing what is best for him as a student and a learner, but she's creating an opportunity for learning for all the other students. I firmly believe an introduction of any type of disability or difference at a younger age begets tolerance and understanding. Carl's presence in the classroom educates his classmates on what a behavior disorder looks like, sounds like, and how to ensure they are helping and not hurting the situation when they're around. These students are learning lifelong skills by simply having him as a learner in their classroom. This is what is best for all students. Likewise, when Carl is having severe outbursts that requires his removal from the classroom, the team has created a plan, guided by Susan and the district SPED director, that ensures students are not witnessing too many traumatic situations like restraint, physical harm towards himself or others, or inappropriate language. When Susan, a para or staff member, sends Carl beginning to escalate, they can address the situation as guided by his IEP and remove him from the classroom to not disturb his classmates' learning. Lastly, when Nancy is better educated on how to help, teach, and guide Carl, her awareness and the patience of herself towards Carl and other students increases, which produces better teaching techniques and behavior response methods for all students' learning. Category 4. In regards to debriefing over my feelings, thoughts, and values, I felt frustrated for Carl and Susan throughout the whole process. I'm not discrediting the stress and frustration that may come with Carl, his choices, his outbursts, but to me, Carl is still an individual kiddo who needs love and support, especially while going through this tough time at home. I also felt pretty frustrated for Susan. As a new teacher in a district, she's already struggling with forming relationships, first-time expectations, meeting staff and students, and upholding legal issues surrounding IEPs. On top of that, she is forced to work with parents and staff who are not supportive of her or her caseload. I thought Nancy's word choice and her actions towards Susan were not appropriate. She is allowed to have bad days and be frustrated. All teachers are. But she needs to consider how her actions affect those around her, as well as reflect on Carl's life and all that Susan is doing positively before being harsh and challenging to work with. I value Susan as an educator, peer, and a person. She demonstrated qualities of perseverance, ethical behavior, and a willingness to value the relationships of staff, parents, and students. I touched on the unresolved issues on slide number 3 regarding the information I still needed to know. I believe the school should create a plan for Carl in regards to calming him down. I think Susan and Nancy need to have a candid conversation about their work relationship, expectation, and roles. And lastly, I believe a plan needs to be put into place for Carl's behavior in regards to positive reinforcement. Category 5. Standard 2 to me is about the administrator or the leader in the building and their capacity to foster a learning environment for all students, regardless of needs, and create a building culture that thrives on student and staff learning. Category 5, Component 1. As an educational leader at the building level, I applied knowledge that promoted the academic success of every student by acting with integrity in regards to my reflection of Susan, Nancy, and Carl's situations, as well as referencing the IEP amendments made by Susan for Carl to benefit his learning as implemented by district and school policy. And lastly, educating Nancy on the techniques used in the classroom to help de-escalate or calm Carl and react to Carl in a way that fosters the continuation and focus on learning. Category 5, Component 2. As an educational leader at the building level, I applied knowledge that promoted the personal well-being of every student by acting with regard for all students in Carl's presence during an outburst or crisis. Seeing a student harm himself or others or even being restrained is quite traumatic, so offering an exit plan, if you will, for Carl when he starts to escalate will allow other students to not be traumatized during Carl's behavior. I touched on this idea previously as well, but Carl's presence in the classroom educates on what a behavior disorder looks like. These students are learning lifelong skills by simply having him present in the classroom. This is what is best for all students: exposure, tolerance, friendship, and understanding. Lastly, an overlap from Component 1 is the time spent working with Nancy on understanding Carl and utilizing new techniques when working with him or with any child with a behavior disorder. As teachers, when we are frustrated or burnt out, we are not teaching at our very best level or meeting the needs of our students on any level. With Nancy in a place of less frustration, more techniques, and education on Carl, she'll likely be better equipped to be the better teacher she needs for her students on an educational and an emotional level. Lastly, Category 5, Component 3. As an educational leader at the building level or acting superintendent, I would have enhanced instructional capacity in the following ways. The first one, when a new SPED teacher started or walked into my building at the beginning of the year, I would have held a staff meeting that allowed for Susan to share the process she would like for purposeful and productive meetings, as well as questions or concerns about students, and allowed the staff to speak openly about things that worked and things that needed to be changed from when Mrs. Lewis, the previous SPED teacher, was present. That way, all members feel valued and feel they have a buy-in while creating a uniform system that requires teachers to meet certain expectations. Next, I would encourage Susan and Nancy to peer or co-teach a couple of lessons so that Nancy not only has the opportunity to learn techniques, but see what would make Carl and her students more successful. Lastly, I would utilize the SIT team for Carl. If the school or district did not have such a team in place, I would call on the school or district psych, the counselor, his homeroom teacher, Nancy, and the SPED teacher, Susan. We would meet bi-monthly as a team to talk data, what was working, what we needed to change, and the number of times we utilized discipline like that was inappropriate or discipline that we needed to do better, or even things like restraint or the safe room. We would continue to meet that often until I felt confidently that Carl's needs had been better met. Thank you so much for watching.